Hi, welcome to today's video on dynamic format strings. Today, we're going to talk about format strings in Power BI. More specifically, we're going to get into dynamic format strings, how you can use DAX to change the way people see the data in a contextually aware way. Very, very cool. So let's head over to Power BI. Okay, so here I have my Power BI file. So my first example is a quite common one where I want to show the correct currency formatting across countries. You'll see in my table on the left that my company's made sales in a lot of different countries. Now, these sales numbers are actually in their home currencies. So this is not very obvious on how it's set up now. And if I was a user and I wanted to add up and add the rows, this wouldn't make a lot of sense because these are all in different currencies. So when we get into formatting, let me click on this and we have our measure called dynamic sales or sales dynamic format, right? This is just a reference of total sales at the moment. We have no formatting set. So right here, once I click on the measure, you can actually change the format here, right? So if I was to change to a whole number, then of course we change all the formatting to a whole number. One thing I want to point out is this is just changing the formatting and not the underlying data. If I was to right click and copy this value and then open my notepad here and paste the value, you'd see that the number that's copied is still the underlying number with all the decimal places. So this isn't like in a column where you can change the data type. If you change the underlying data type of the underlying column, this will actually change how the data is stored, and it will remove all the decimal places in this case. But for formatting, all we're doing is just changing the view without changing any of the data, without changing the data type underneath. So what I want to do is I want to bring in the specific formats for each currency. If we have a look at my data model here, we can see that I have my sales table, and then off it, I have a currency table. And this is joined in the sales table, which is my fact table. I have a record for each row to describe what currency that sale was in. And I have in my currency table, I head over, you can see here, and I have the currency, which is what it's joined in. And I also have this currency format. Now, this currency format is a currency format string, or it's a format string in Power BI. Format strings, they may look a bit confusing, but the link is down below in the description if you want to understand how to write these format strings. You may have used them in Excel or seen them in other places. They're quite common across Microsoft products. And they just describe, for example, I had whole number decimal, things like that, how many decimal places, anything else you want to do. So when I head back over, let's first write a new measure. And what we're going to do is we're going to write a measure called format string. Now for this, I just want to return the value of the format string. So I'm going to say, give me the selected value of the currency for the format string. If I add this, you'll see here that now I've returned the format string for each of the countries' currency. So Spain here we can see is got euros, the UK has pounds and so on. So this is now dynamically returning the format string of each country and their currency format string. Again, if you don't understand what this means in the format string, go read the documentation below. But just understand this is a format string which just describes on how we will view the data. Now, this is good, but this isn't very useful. I don't really want to see this information. What I want it to do is apply it to the sales dynamic format measure. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab this code. If I head back over to my sales dynamic format measure, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the format from whole number to dynamic. Now, when you change it to dynamic, something very cool happens. And right here, we get this new little drop down. You can see that we have two options. We have format and we have measure. If I go back to measure, measure is just the standard DAX measure, and this is what that format, that measure will return. So for sales dynamic format, it's just referencing total sales, and that's the numbers you see. If I go to the format, this is going to be the format string that we see. So if I say I wanted to give it 3 decimal places like that, and click OK, you'll see now this is changing what the format string is. So this is that custom format string. Again, I can get quite complex, like the format strings you see here. However, I don't want this as a hard-coded static format. I want this as dynamic. And to do that, I can simply write any DAX statement I want. So I'm going to write selected value from the currency format. This is going to return what we see in the second and the third column here in the table, the format string. And it's going to apply this format string to each of the numbers in the measure. So you can see instantly now, this has now applied that format string on the right to the measure itself. It's not changing underlying data. And you can see that in the graph on the right. Like nothing changed on the graph on the right. However, just the view, when we actually view the number itself, has changed. So this is really powerful. And now I can instantly see which currency it is. And again, this is dynamic. So it's looking up from this table based on the selection that the user has. Now I want to go to my second example. My second example is that I want to play a hilarious practical joke on my colleague who's called Dave, because he keeps stealing my lunch. So you'll see sales dynamic format here. This is one I've done earlier. So once I click on it, you can see again, it's just referencing the total sales. However, I already have the format to dynamic. So let me go over to the format and let me see what DAX I have. So here I'm calling the user principal name. And the user principal name, if you're not familiar, just returns the email of the person who's logged in and is viewing the report. So I've said, if the person who's logged in and viewing the report is this email, then return this format string. And you can see here, format strings are very flexible. I can do all sort of fun stuff and I can get quite creative with them. So I said return 3 ducks. Otherwise, you just return this, which is a standard format string for the format here, with have commas and no decimal places. So as I'm not Dave, I see the standard format string. However, what I can do is if I go to my modeling, I can click view as. And this is going to emulate me logging in as Dave. And so I can see what Dave would see when he logs in. When he logs in here, oh, this is crazy. Everything's been changed to 3 ducks. So Dave will see this version, the 3 ducks. Everyone else will just see the numbers. Now, this is a silly example, but I want to present it for 2 reasons. Firstly, I want to show how powerful these dynamic format strings can be. They are completely contextually aware, like any other DAX statement. So they can update based on who's logged in, what users has selected, things like formatting tables and selections, stuff like that, even calculation groups. Secondly, I want to explain this is not security and not proper data masking. You might say, oh, this will be a good way to mask data. But again, if I go and let me copy for France value, copy this value, head over to my notebook and paste, you'll see I can see the underlying data, no problem. So again, data formatting, format strings, they're not masking, they're not security, they're simply a view just to make things easier for the end user. So, dynamic format strings. As a recap, now dynamic format strings allow you to customize, right, how the numbers, dates, or really any values are displayed. And that's based on some DAX measures. Right, really good, especially useful for readability, currency switching, things like date formats are very common as well, as we have a lot of different ways we want to see date formats. Again, it automatically adjusts your formatting based on the DAX measure. One of the big advantages as well is that it doesn't convert your number to a string. This is if you used to use the format function in DAX. This actually changes everything to a string. You can achieve similar things, but it changes it to a text. That obviously changes the DAX and how it works. This leaves the format alone. It doesn't affect the numbers. It just simply changes how we view it. And contextually aware, like other DAX measures. This means we can see who's logged in. This means what selections they have, what row of the table we're in. Now, be careful because complex format logic may impact report performance. So imagine now that if I have a dynamic format string turned on and I'm using a DAX measure, now every time I use this measure in something, it's got to calculate two separate DAX measures to return one value because it has to return the underlying value, then it has to return the format string. So it can get quite slow and impact performance if you have complex logic because you're doubling the amount of DAX needed. Can obscure data if used incorrectly, right? We want to help people reusability. If we get a bit too complex, maybe we end up obscuring data and actually displaying data incorrectly. So be careful. And again, not security, right? This isn't masking. Original values can be seen. It's simply a view. Now, tips, use with caution, right? So complex DAX, and especially be careful if it references other measures in your format, because this can really affect performance. And finally, it changes the format only, which we've talked about, not the underlying data type. So it keeps the data in exactly the same format. If you want to change the underlying data type, you need to go back to the column and change the data type on the column itself in the actual data in Power Query before you get to the format string. So that is dynamic format strings. Let us know what you think in the comments. If there's anything else you want us to cover, please go ahead and drop a comment, like and subscribe. It will really help us out. Check out our other videos as well. We have a lot going on here, analytic endeavors. So thanks so much for stopping by, and we will see you again